Democrats. Today is Monday, February 7th. It's time for the Chair's Daily Live. Happy Monday. So today marks the beginning of the 2022 legislative session. Consequently, it also marks the governor's State of the State address. So before I get into that nonsense, I want to remind you that our legislators are there. They're fighting, they're speaking up for us. And if you see them, if you're friends with any of them on any social media, please reach out and thank them for the work that they have to do, because the governor's speech, wowza. He has laid it out. It is going to be a little bit, it's going to be tough for them this legislative session. So reach out, thank a legislator, go out to the OK Democrats Facebook page, and you will see their contact information. Reach out, let their legislative assistant or their executive assistant know that we really appreciate them. And hello from Framingham, Mass. All righty, so I was going to talk about other things, but I think, yeah, it'd be irresponsible if I didn't talk about the governor's, let's call it a fantasy speech. The words he spewed. I'm not sure how we want to talk about that speech. So first off, I'm going to talk about the thing that he did not talk about. He never said the word COVID. He euphemistically talked about being wide open for business. He kind of talked about it, about not being in the classroom, but he never talked about COVID. You guys, if you've ever seen me, if you've ever watched me, you know I'm sick of COVID, and you know I'm sick of talking about COVID. But here's the facts. Over 12,000 Oklahomans have lost their lives to COVID. 12,000. And not mentioning them or pretending like they don't exist is egregious, particularly when it comes from the leader of our state. On top of that, maybe he didn't mention it because he can't get away from the fact that we are number 50 in states with regards to how healthy is your state when it comes to COVID. How much at risk are you of COVID? We're number 1 at risk. We're number 50 for safety. Maybe that's why he didn't talk about it, because he's embarrassed. Except he kept talking about a whole bunch of other things he should have been embarrassed about. So I'm not real sure what was happening there. He talked about a lot of things and I felt like maybe he was going to say some things I liked, because he talked about hope and the science of hope. Just Friday, my whole topic was about hope, because that's what gets me up every day, is to talk about hope. And so to hear those words come out of the governor's mouth, I'm going to quote Representative Marie Turner from House District 88. She said, well, maybe this speech was not a state of the state, but a preview of what he hopes will happen, because he was not talking about what has been happening. Ever since he was elected, ever since his first, when he was running in his first state of the state, he talked about how he's going to move our state to top 10. He keeps talking about it. We've seen no evidence that there's been any action or any plans with regards to making us a top 10 state, but he sure referenced it a lot today. Don't know. I mean, I don't know if it means what he thinks it means, because he kept talking about top 10 state. He has a new URL about top 10 state, but he's not making any plans to get us there. And until we can elect someone else, it is his job to take us to the top 10. So right out the gate, he said in a bragging tone that we have the biggest supermajority in state history. So let me translate that for you. What that means is there is no balance in our state legislature. It is a super majority for Republicans, which means that our legislators are writing bills and very few of them will get across the finish line. And Representative Monroe Nichols from House District 72 pointed out that only 3% of bills written by African-American legislators ever make it across the finish line. That's where we live, guys. But he bragged about how there is no balance in the state legislature. I'm not real sure if that's a thing to brag about, but it says that he does not feel accountable to all of Oklahoma. He's only governing for the people who agree with him. Whether it's for their own good or not. Um, Still mad about him not mentioning COVID. I knew so many souls who are no longer here because of COVID, and he continued to mishandle. He says he's the education governor. He talked about education for about a minute, and in very vague terms without any specificity. Um, our teachers are nowhere near the top paid in our region. And he kind of talked about paying teachers six-figure salaries, but he didn't talk about a plan. He didn't talk about criteria. He just kind of talked about it. I have no confidence that we will have six-figure teachers in our state anytime soon. So he talked about education for about a minute. And then he talked about protecting the Oklahoma way of life, which meant protecting police officers. Listen, I don't want to live in a world where we don't have police officers. I'm not a person who said defund the police. I'm a person who said reimagine the police, because we don't necessarily need to send a gun for a mental health crisis, but not defund the police. He spent a lot of time talking about the plans he had for improving the lives of law enforcement officers. 3 of my family members are former law enforcement officers, so I'm all about some law enforcement officers. But if you consider yourself to be the education governor, it seems like you would have talked about that more than law enforcement. He started out by talking about first responders. And I thought, oh, wait, maybe he's going to talk about COVID. No, we weren't talking about nurses. We weren't talking about doctors. We were only talking about law enforcement. He did mention the fact that we don't have enough nurses in our state. We don't have enough teachers, and we don't have enough engineers. He didn't talk about what the plan is to get them, because he focused on making sure that we can make people ready for employment. And I'm all for making people ready for employment. And I also agree that not everybody is college material. Not everybody wants to go to college. But whether you want to go to college or not, you should be able to feed your family, have a home, have a life. Under the education governor, only about 15% of high school students graduate prepared to go to college. Although I think that's an exaggeration, and yet another attack on our education system, another attack on our teachers. And that's for a whole nother day. But there was an attack on our teachers. I don't think our governor understands how right to work works. We are a right to work state. No one can force you to join a union. And so if people have joined unions, it's because they've chosen to. The alleging that unions introduce CRT into our lexicon is just poppycock. He just made that up whole cloth. But it's a way to villainize unions, to villainize teachers, because he has a plan and he did everything but say, my plan is to privatize education. My plan is to rob neighborhood schools of all the resources. If the dollars go with the students, there are no dollars left for the students that are in that school. Public dollars should go for public education. He made a statement that God gave children to parents, not the government. Okay, it's an ugly statement, a whole bunch of other stuff. But here's what I'm going to say. God gave those children to those parents. And so a parent should be able to make a decision about their student, not about the whole student. And if they decide that they would like for their student to go to private school, more power to them. All 4 private schools. You want your kid to go to private school? Great, wonderful. But you should have to pay for it. You should have to pay for it. That's how that works. But if we rob all of the public dollars for private schools, what happens to those who can't afford private schools? Their schools now are underfunded, and we are dooming those children to a sad future. I'm just so annoyed, and I'm sorry that I'm not talking in a logical sense. It's just talking about this makes me so annoyed. So beforehand, before he ever spoke, he said he was going to talk about education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Education, he talked about it for that long, and half of the time it was vilifying our teachers. healthcare. He talked about healthcare for law enforcement officers. Because I mean, I don't even understand how you talk about healthcare in 2022 and you don't mention COVID at all, but he managed it. Or maybe he didn't want to talk about it because he removed the only doctors from the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority board. Or maybe he didn't want to talk about it because of the flop of moving that agency to Stillwater and breaking it. Maybe that's why he didn't want to talk about it, but he didn't talk about healthcare in a meaningful way. And then infrastructure. He spent a lot of time taking credit for things that happened before he got there. So if you missed it, maybe you're more calm than I am and you'll have a better evening. If you watched it, you know what we're up against and you know why it's so important that this man can no longer be our governor. This man has to be replaced. And also why we need balance in our legislature. They just do whatever he wants. And he only wants for a certain segment of our population. And that's not how you make Oklahoma a top 10 state. This is why you have to vote every time there's an election. You have to make sure that everybody you know who is eligible to vote is registered and that they do vote. And you got to help me find candidates to beat the folks who aren't looking out for everybody. Because as Suzanne Bloomfield said, it boils down to the haves versus the have-nots. And our governor is only looking out for the haves. And that makes me sad because there are fewer haves than have-nots in our state. All righty. Thanks for joining me. I will be back here tomorrow at 4:15. You guys have a good evening.